opportunity for some conversation first, just in case we get blindsided in the public session, but, or the general session. So, the three things on the agenda, and we're going to switch things around. We've got, the sign that's looked at for historical purposes. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at that. That one feels straightforward to me. We're switching items number 2 and 3. The public hearing is going to be the second item. That one's a straightforward one as well, in my opinion.
Are you saying there's such a thing as straightforward?
Well, it's
We have talked about crosswalks and traffic.
it's a,
Kids.
I heard the word tonight, technicality. And so essentially, we're saying that signs can be in public rights of way, whether or not there's curb and gutter. As opposed to, it used to just say if there was. So that'll be second agenda item. We'll swap those around. And the last one is the packet that was sent out yesterday, I think, or this morning sometime. But with the mixed use overlay, the updated packet, correct. So we can go through that as item number 3, and that might be the one that there might be some more discussion on. So that's our agenda. The working session will dedicate to the general plan and the section that we've been talking about, or that we'll. But before doing that, I just want to make sure everyone is comfortable moving to that, or if there's anything with tonight's general session that you wanted to quickly have a conversation about. But we'll proceed that way then. Jake, I'll turn the time over to you to guide this section then.
Thank you. Tracy, can we hit the slide? Good evening, everyone. So the general plan section, tonight we're going to go through the environment and public services chapter, and those two topics are together, environment and public services. My thoughts on this chapter as presented has a lot of good background information, research, and all of that, but also I'm not seeing necessarily goals or specific direction to go with these topics. And so that's where we need your input. And so I can add that to the notes and we can send that back to the consultant team on it.
Awesome.
So just a second here and all of the Zoom and I can pull that up, but I'm going to go ahead and if you got it in front of you as well, we'll look at the implementation part first. Okay, let me hop on here. There we go. Teresa, you need to let me in. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Okay, I'm muted there. And screen sharing. Okay. So this is what we want to look at. And I like putting everything on the PDF so that way it's all in one place that I can share with the consultant team that worked on it. So this is under implementation, environment and public services. Verify that ordinances and processes are in place to ensure the protection of the city's natural resources. Review and update Morgan City's emergency management plan. Develop long-term plans for city infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, electricity, adding stormwater to that list. Skipping parks and open space. So diving into, I think this is the next one here. Okay, this is the goal for environment and public services. Protect Morgan's natural resources and the environment to preserve the quality of life for residents, visitors, and wildlife. Any comments on that goal? Then coming into the policies, policy one, ensure sensitive lands, waterways, drainage, corridors, and other critical natural features in Morgan City are protected and preserved. So ways to achieve that policy, verify that ordinances and processes are in place to ensure the protection of the city's natural resources, determine the long-term recreation function of the Weber River through additional studies, identify additional tools and measures necessary to achieve the long-term hydraulic functions and recreational role of the Weber River, acknowledge the importance of the Weber River to the community by preserving key land along the river corridor for riparian function and habitat, natural open space, and future public access where possible. Continue to regulate the impacts on water quality by enforcing guidelines and regulations that will reduce water quality impacts to the maximum extent possible. Regulate impacts on wildlife by adopting guidelines and regulations that will reduce impacts to the maximum extent possible. Or is my red line there kind of taking out the second half? Didn't think that was needed. Consider wildlife habitat as part of assessing ecological and recreational roles of the Weber River. So this policy, which I would maybe call a goal, is about protecting the sensitive lands and then also specifically the Weber River. And my impression as to working with Morgan City for a year, not quite a year, 10 months, is that I'm surprised how little we've talked about the Weber River, to be honest, considering it splits the city in two. I know it's there and it's talked about and all that, but it seems like there's more opportunity with the Weber River in the future. I don't know what I haven't been down through the corridor. I haven't floated it or walked it or fished it. So I know most of it is private land, but what are your thoughts on these, this policy and ideas behind it and the text and also the Weber River?
Yeah, one of the questions I have is who monitors or regulates the tubing companies? Is that
Okay.
a county or is that a city? Most of the floating is in the county. But I just wondered, how are they regulated? And because they're good, but they're also need some control because they have a lot of trash and stuff. And
Okay.
so that's obviously a concern of mine. And so who regulates that? No one.
So-
Well, you are downstream no matter what, whether it's happening
That's right.
in the city or not, it is downstream.
Yeah, so what they have as far as the Morgan County, whoever licenses them is where they're put into the river. So obviously, all of the tubing companies we have right now are actually licensed in the county. We had Weber Tubing did do their staging on Commercial Street. That was the one that we monitored. And as far as enforcement's hard, it really is hard. We could only have forced her due to complaints. I don't know
And-
what the county does.
And you don't have to have a permit to tube it, right? I mean,
No, only
anybody
if
can
it's a
just go grab a
company.
tube, and if you jump in at a public access
Yep.
point, then you're.
If you're a company, big valve right now. Bonafide drafting and tubing company, Have heartburn with those that just go up there with 24 back in there and jump in with the one part two. So that's the. Yeah, that's the difficult thing.
Is trash the biggest issue? Is public safety an issue too? Or, I mean, are people intoxicated and?
Yeah, pull the tag with that. And it's, I mean, there are people walking around with not much on and it's throwing trash everywhere and, it's pretty bad.
Okay,
And the wildlife officers and the sheriff's deputies, and they all monitor it at the Taggart, traffic cordon. Quite a few tickets are written.
Well, you know, I'm a pretty avid fly fisherman.
Yep.
And, you know, I've walked along the river one day, not just above Como a little bit, and I got so upset, I went home, got 2 big garbage bags and completely filled them with bottles and cans and garbage.
Mhm.
And I couldn't hardly pick them up after, and then, so I called the county and they said, yeah, we have to monitor, but they brought up the same situation you did, we can't. control-
monitor it. What does that mean?
Yeah, but they said we can't control those who just jump in the river and
Plus,
head
a
down.
lot
the
of the
river. But they should
businesses
be
are
able.
licensed. They actually put in. Yeah.
So,
Anyway.
this is an interesting idea of, you know, with UDOT does corridor studies like with roads and they'll go through multiple cities and all that, all parties and kind of look at a whole corridor. Has there ever been a Weber River, like recreational natural systems study? I almost wonder if it almost need to be Morgan County and Summit County and the cities, Hannaford. I also consult Hannaford. I haven't heard this issue from them, but they're kind of at the beginning of it. And maybe it's there too. I haven't asked them, but I don't know. There's maybe an idea in terms of that. And also just, is there signage on it? Like where you put in that says, you know, lots of trash cans, all of that. You're going to be ticketed. And also just respect this beauty. Here you are, you're coming to enjoy the beauty and you're destroying it. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but that would bother me.
So can anything be put here? to
Yeah.
Help that?
Yeah, I think that's where maybe we can add text to the general plan saying that it's an issue. That's not being properly addressed. And highlighting that, even adding a picture of tubing. And then also have one of these strategies to work with Morgan County and Summit County and others to have a river management plan. There's got to be something like
At
that.
some point, wouldn't there be some coordination with our general planning process and the county's general planning? I know we got together early on, but it feels like, whatever we come up with, since the river goes through the whole county should apply to both. And I like the idea of the control, whatever that ends up looking like. What I think would be a tragedy is if somehow we make it where a person can't jump in without going into a commercial company. I probably spent more time on this river than just about anybody in the county. That was my commute home for work for about 5 years when I worked in Round Valley and would tube home every day. Took a
How'd you
tube.
get there?
My mom took me to work in the morning on the tube, came home on the tube every night. And I've seen all kinds of things in that river. But I think it'd be a tragedy if we just made it where unless you go through a commercial organization, you can't get in.
Yeah, most issues in the county, not the city, so there has to be some coordination because that's where most of the problems are.
Yeah.
Is there a way to put in this general plan is maybe, when we talk about parks and trails, designate, I think it would be nice to, it's not just for companies, but for other people to have designated areas to go in and out. So we can maybe look at doing a general plan where we actually have the county put in bathrooms and a parking lot and
That's gonna be up
receptacles.
to the county. However, you can really ask, unless it's in the city,
Yeah,
is the pullout spots, are the pullout spots in the city?
currently, no.
And that's, this particular issue really is Morgan County.
Yeah.
But you are downstream,
Yeah.
certainly.
But like you say, everything is downstream.
The only permitting that this county is involved with is just a business license. That has no restrictions on what they do. The restrictions are with Fish and Game folks. DNR there who give restrictions to the scenario. There's at least one of the drafting companies who worked pretty heavily with the county council. And they had 3 or 4 groups lined up, like you mentioned, Trout Unlimited. And I can't remember, Jake may mentioned a couple of other groups were lined up, and they did some studies to try and talk about diversions and dams and all that kind of stuff. They tried to do those. They found resistance with the ditch companies not wanting to deal with the study. Trash a problem or other problem happen. County's aware of that. The county's doing some patrolling, but the county's locked by state regulations, by DWR regulations also. So the county can't come and make regulations against what DWR already has permitted. So it's a county situation. Yeah, we're downstream, but I'm not sure what our general plan does as far as picking up garbage out of the river. Yeah.
The owner Destination Sports, Donna, she is really proactive on that river. She does a lot of cleanup. She made a post in January about Morgan County is notified from the governor's office economic development of a development grant, something to do with the river, things like that. So I know there's a lot of efforts in the community of
They can
things.
charge for parking and use that money for trash and bathrooms.
Someone stand there 24/7. It's like 55 cents.
Well, it'd be $5 or $10. I mean, but
They do have those, they have bathroom porta potties there. And you just have someone there 24/7.
sure.
This says they've gone, this in May says that local irrigation companies in Morgan met with engineers and hydrologists from River Restoration to help gain understanding of irrigation systems, permissions of the companies, feasibility. This is just in May. You got it.
And I do
Well-
think as they work on their county plan, that the river is more of a focus for the county. I was kind of surprised to hear you say you haven't heard a lot of talk about the river, because I have, but I think that's because I work for the county and they're putting a lot of effort into building the river, building trails, building sort of that outdoor tourism.
Trail systems
Yeah.
and parking spots, and I just don't know that. I get the income aspect of charging, but I don't know that's what the rural culture.
That may be really difficult too, to even, I mean, the Provo River is a lot more developed, so to speak, in terms of development around and you can still just go throw a canoe or tube in there and the Colorado, I mean, the only places where you need a permit to go is like Cataract Canyon and, it's National Park Service kind of deal.
One thing on this goal, just like the wording, in goal 9, it's talking about protect and preserve. And the one thing I felt a little bit ripped off about that goal was there's nothing about improvement. And I don't think protecting and preserving is the best goal, because we're sit around here with all these wonderful opportunities with no goal to improve.
And what does improvement look like?
Well, like develop the whole concept of public service. So the goal would be to develop the public services in a way that the public benefits and it's funded well and it's maintained well. And so, for example,
The access, is that like parking, boat ramps? Well, regarding the river, what is,
Yeah.
what is?
one
improvement?
example that came to my mind, I don't know if anybody's been to St. Anthony, Idaho, but St. Anthony, Idaho has a wonderful park right by the Maverick. Like, it's not much different than over by 7-Eleven. And that river, I don't know if that's the Snake River right there. I don't think it is. I think it's a river coming out of Victor Driggs.
Henry's,
It's one of those rivers. And that river comes right through that town, and the way that they've developed that and built that with that park, there's the city parks right there. They've got, basically, they've turned part of the river into a lake. There's sandy beaches, they've brought in sand, there's diving boards, there's tubes that you slide right from the park in a water tube down into the pond. There's a place where they've made water still, so you can be on kayaks or.
Ogden
inflatables.
has that down in Ogden City.
Yeah. To me, that's an expression of bettering a public service to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a lot bigger river. That's an example.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you what in the city is right now. Where the Memphis Mile and now, going up in there, eventually goes to Pickleball Court. Coming along with it, and then over here, I'll call it after the old big grass over here. The city bought that property here a while ago, a couple of years ago, the city bought the tips and making out of it. Park or some sort of there, so. I guess. Finally, I'll make this comment and I'll shut up. I've been here all my life and I've always had to be, nobody in the world appreciate the fact that that's what we do. But a whole lot of towns have now. I think for a long, long time, we looked at as if there was a dumping ground. We'll throw our trash in it, I noticed the other day, I walked across the river bridge and there's a safety cone in the river. Things like that drive me nuts. Because it is an attribute that's unique to our city, so. Whatever we gotta do, whatever we need to do to try and preserve that and try and enhance that, I'm all for.
I think that's the word I'm hearing from both of you.
Yeah.
This was improved, you're saying. Yes, let's protect it, let's preserve it, that's great, enhance it, but that means in this case, access points. Right, craft receptacles, picnic benches, whatever it is, I mean, I think as long as in the goal, we're putting that aspect of it, we can do a thing.
I almost think, I mean, maybe it's in here, but having a Morgan City Weber River plan. Like where you just focus on your borders end to end. And what can you really do with that in terms of recreation and access and quality environment. There's a park called Kelly's Park by McCall, Idaho, by Lake Cascade State Park. And this Kelly's Park it's a kayak park, but there's like a visitor center and it's just absolutely gorgeous and pretty special.
I think as you look at this from the city end, I think it probably is something we need to do on our own. Because the development is going to come along the stretches of the Weber River in the city before the county. I was speaking with a member of the Milton Area Plan group that's part of all of this just the other day. And in one of their, I guess, recent meetings, they discussed a future trail plan and they very quickly came to the opinion, we don't want that. And you're going to find that as you go down up East Canyon Creek and you go down the Weber River, the property owners are not going to, without an absolute fight, the current property owners are not going to let you build a trail. I know my family, we have course close to a quarter mile along the Weber River, and the garbage from the fishermen and stuff we clean up now, I can't even imagine a walking trail. So I think as you look at the development, I think we need to be working on this maybe in advance of what the county will do. Eventually it'll tie to them, but you look at a lot of that ground out down through Milton, Peterson, you're probably, I mean, my kids and grandkids probably won't even see that development, but I said, don't you think it's worth looking at the, trail systems, rough sketches? So in the future, when a developer does purchase property and says, here's what we're going to do, that you can say, well, we've had our trail plan in place for 50 years and you need to accommodate this, and he says, I don't care. You know, which is fine, but like I say, you're dealing with a lot of property owners who don't want that, so it'll be the next property owner in the county,
Yeah.
and we're definitely closer to that here.
Yeah, a number of years ago, I did something in Oakley. And what the city was trying to do, I don't know if they finished or not, was they wanted a trail corridor. Is that the Weber River that goes through Oakley, comes down from Smith and Morehouse? And the plan was to offer bonus density to the landowners for a trail easement. And they were all, the landowners were on board, the city, it was working together. I think it did finalize and come through. But actually taking these large properties, and it's just an easement. They still maintain their land, but allowed that trail so that everybody that grew up running and playing in the Weber River up there, just as kids and trespassing without, knowing it necessarily, that was going to continue as trail usage and that. And with the dairy property potentially changing, there's a big river section on that. That future ordinance could include trail access and trail part of that. And I think you're right. It's good to open things up and allow access, but then with that should also come stewardship and even the city should have resources for trash and cleanup and things like that. Logan City has a lot of trail on the Logan River. And I think it's well developed with trash cans and bridges and all that. And I haven't heard the same issues there. So part of it is, I think the tubing crowd is probably the worst crowd. And so that's casting a bad shadow on others.
I was just gonna say the other thought that I had, based on what you're sharing and is the word proactive. Meaning that Morgan is positioned, like you said, to set the pace for the rest of the county and what this ends up looking like. And I think, we can assert that position even in the language of this plan. You called it a specific Morgan City, Weber River, whatever. But I think making that a proactive and leading the county by example, I think is important.
Okay.
Is there a, like, the adopt a highway concept? Is there any way to do anything like that in a river?
There is adopt a park and adopt trails. So yeah, I love that adopt a river section,
Because I feel like Morgan people take pride. There's a lot, there's not the percentage wise, I feel like that high percentage of people in Morgan take pride in stuff and have resources to make things better. And so I just wonder, what if we just empowered our own citizenship somehow? Like, what if it seems like over there by the high school, there's like a shop or something over there by the river. Like, what if the shop owned their own river frontage and made it cool and put up some cool shop stuff? And what if the football team and the baseball team owned a piece and the soccer team and Mark Francis owned a piece, and he had his little sign on there saying, this portion of the river brought to you by the Francises.
Yeah. Keep it. Yeah, I think it's great. I think you certainly don't want the signs like all along the river, but if a group would adopt it, any kind of group, you see those adopt the highway ones, and they would go out once a year.
Walk on the smile all the time. Yeah, but I don't see a way that I can make it. If it was like a 10 linear feet, where I could be like, let's make that pretty, and everybody has to make their 10 linear feet pretty, and it becomes that.
Well, I think the Mickelson Mile is pretty well self-taken care of, because I pick up stuff when I walk there. They have the dog things along there. So I don't think the Mickelson Mile is where the issue is. I don't see a lot of people using it. I walk over there all the time, and it's beautiful. So, but it's beautiful. And I don't think it's used as much as it could be. So I hear people say, why don't we have any walking trails in Morgan? We got one.
Well, I would say even into the river. The biggest thing I was saying, a lot of times, just from the bank of the river down into the river. Like, okay, it's it's not friendly to go down on a tube anymore because you might die because there's no treatment. There's no shrubbery maintenance, but over in River Cove Townhomes, those people all have their thing manicured nicely. And so just a way to allow us to manicure our own riverbeds would be nice, you know what I mean?
You want to be careful with manicuring riverbeds because they're meant to be wild.
And to say, please,
And-
let's not.
and
encourage
also,
people to
like,
Take their
you know,
shovels.
Fish
the
habitat, they
riverbank.
want the roots, yeah. But the best manicured river. Yeah, those things need to go. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. But when it's in a general plan, it just kind of backs it up and it's a reminder of it. And the general plan is where all good basic ideas should live for the land. Let's jump on to the next one. Evaluate and update as needed current regulations and guidelines pertaining to development in areas with areas. It's a double in areas with potential hazards. So what continue to regulate future development by following uniform building code, seismic provisions. Continue to regulate future development by following the guidelines for FEMA flood insurance. I know the city's actually looking at doing something with the flood maps. I don't know if Teresa, if you have anything additional on that, but last I heard they were looking at getting a grant. The county was going to apply for a grant so that the city would have money within the city boundary to do a FEMA study to look at really affects businesses that are in that sensitive lands, the floodplains.
Doing a study by the new bridge on down. I think it goes through the whole city. Do you remember? We talked about it in COG.
Yeah, I think they've applied for it, haven't they?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they've done more than.
Okay. Continue to recognize the hazards of development on unsuitable and less suitable lands to people and property by enforcing guidelines, regulations that will prevent development in areas that cannot be effectively mitigated and ensuring proper mitigation of site hazards and constraints where feasible. Evaluate zones and the foothills to ensure current slope development standards accomplish community goals.
So on
And I added this, we have the sensitive land overlay zone and processes. Maybe it's just reviewing that if needed.
on that last one too, just, I'm curious, are there any things, because in the goal it says protect, and preserve, and we're adding improve, but are there anything that we can do to protect certain lands with these zones that from mining? In other words, we had, I forget the company that came in above the hitching post. Is that Geneva? Yeah. So, when that came in and came through the planning commission, our hands were completely tied. The state came in, said, we're doing it. We've allowed it, whatever. They've got their permit and there's nothing we could do. I'm just curious, is that always going to be the case? The state can just come in and say, we're going to mine this? I don't know how
Did
that
your
works.
zoning prohibit it in that location already? And did they not have any sort of zoning entitlement previously?
I don't know.
That's one of those where specifically in state law, they preclude any local regulation at all, Jake. They've taken it to us on that one.
But if you saw in the news, the Parley's Canyon deal, I kind of saw a little bit of that at Salt Lake County before I left. They did change the zoning there to remove that and it certainly stalled it for a year. I don't think it's been resolved yet because the state is
Yeah.
supposed to look at local ordinance.
Correct.
Part of state code.
Yeah, but it's they definitely have the say on that, the state.
They have a state mining permit, not a gravel permit.
Yeah.
You can't regulate them under the gravel ordinance. They have a
Yeah.
state mining permit. And according to Steve and Gary, we looked at it back when they first came. Without state mining permit, we can't do anything about it. Doesn't matter if you have regulations or not. Doesn't matter if you're zoned or not.
Yeah.
And they started outside the city limits. We were trying to proactively put something in place when they came in city limits. What Steve and Gary found out, since they have a state mining permit, there's not a lot we can do about it.
Okay.
So the answer is no. Is that what I'm hearing? We can't protect against that.
It is. I think you would have to fight it with a lot of resources. And it may
Yeah,
not.
Yeah, we don't want to roll over and play dead. We just have to understand the reality of it.
Steve, what do you think are the best things the city should do then for that? I mean,
With regard to the mining,
yeah,
I mean, I think our current ordinance protects against that. Again, we just have to be aware. I mean, I know that we worked really hard on trying to negotiate with the state access, hunters access. The company would give, some type of public access to that public land that's beyond them. And then we'd come up with a terminus for their operation in order to save that view shed. And I don't recall. I know that it looked like we were making some progress, then all of a sudden it stopped. And I'm sure that Mayor Little can probably give us an update on that. That's the last I recall.
We discussed that with them early on as a possibility. And what's been found, and there's some other folks in the county that took that on and pursued that. We found out is the designation of that DWR ground is designated such that they cannot allow human traffic onto that ground by way of trails. And I forget the exact designation of that ground. UDOT's bound by the type of designation that ground is to not allow that trail into there. But even that trail, we were negotiating to get access through there to get the state ground for our trails, but that didn't do anything as far as stopping or hauling the gravel extraction or the mining. Didn't do anything about the mining.
okay.
And we talked about that. I'm not sure we even put in place any mining gravel as part of our ordinance. Somebody may want to look at that and see if it's even part of our ordinance. We talked about it. Steve's right. We talked about it. I don't think we ever officially adopted. We were trying to work with them and trying to get some of their verbiage enough to cooperate. And they just quit talking to us.
Okay.
Because they had what they wanted and they knew they had it. They quit talking to us about negotiating. They talked about annexing in when they want to annex in for you to get some of our power. At that point, we thought we could negotiate with them and put together an ordinance, and that annexation discussion's gone away as well. They decided they're not going to worry about annexing. If they got what they want, they have. They're not worried about negotiating annexing.
Are they taxed on the product they take off that mountain?
Yeah.
And what that they sell out of the little shop there, we do get sales tax from that part they sell. That's their shack sits in the city limits.
But what they haul out is not taxed.
No. Just what they sell at their little shack.
Okay. Next one, utilize unsuitable or less suitable lands for open space and trail corridors where feasible. I kind of think that should just say establish a trail corridor network throughout the city.
Is there just a time where somebody
Steep slopes.
When, I think that a little bit ties in with policy too, and evaluate then the foothills, ensure current slope stuff. I think some of that may come in with our sensitive lands and overlay zones, and really try to work hard with developers to allow higher densities. I can think of one piece of property in particular that they will be wanting to put 60 townhouses on, probably in the next, I would bet, within 5 years. And I would love to see a higher density allowed somewhere else and leave this piece of property alone. But I think we need to be able to work with them on that and be upfront and say, and know exactly what we can offer to try and maybe leave a piece of ground alone. There's a very specific one I'm thinking of, and tie it. Well, it's over there on by Jenny Lane and all that. If we could, there's a piece between 700 East and Sunset. I would love to see a higher density further up on the hill where they're already going to build townhomes, and just leave that alone. It's
Is that right here?
a steep.
Oh, okay.
Just, let's just put all, up there. And
You'd like to see that hill preserved, the trail?
there's no trail there, but it's just steep.
Yeah. Yeah, I have looked at this on the Wardell project, right? That's all right here. Yeah,
You're down and over to the right for that.
oh, it's right here.
Yeah, that one. And to your left. Down and to your left over to that right there. So that's just one area. And I think as we go forward and maybe in the future, potentially get more development and growth on that hill, try to allow higher densities, like I guess your overlay zones, you call it. Maybe allow more density in one spot in exchange for let's leave this alone.
Yeah, could do, some cities do trail bonuses. And, yeah, the other idea is you're clustering. If they bring a big piece of property and they say, okay, traditional zoning may say quarter acre, half acre lots, but if you'll cluster with small in one part of it and then keep the other open with trails, it's a lot more cost effective for the developer, and also it gives you that public benefit of the open space trails.
Yeah, and Matt with Jones Associates and I put my city hat on for a second. There's another piece of property that something may happen on in several years. We've thought it's already in the sensitive lands because of flood issues. It's like, why don't we do that higher density over here and leave all that open space? And it solves a whole host of issues. But I don't think anyone's ever thought of it that way. You just think you got to build everywhere.
Yeah. Ray?
And I guess what Matt's saying, I'm not sure those areas that are too steep to build on, how you put a trail corridor in them. For me, the two don't even mesh together.
You can do trails on steeper slopes.
Yeah, it's too steep to build on, but you don't even put a trail in it.
You can do trails on steeper slopes yeah.
If people aren't using flatlands in town, they're not gonna go climb that one for two blocks up on the side of the mountain.
Well, certainly not for 2 blocks, but you can do
That's how long
trails.
that one's gonna be.
Can, but then, you preserve it. If what you see there, a bunch of switchbacks cut into the hill, what do we preserve?
Anyway,
Okay, let's go to this next one. Provide adequate public facilities and services within the community in a timely manner and with attention given to the needs of specific user groups. Provide services and facilities or partner with local agencies to ensure Morgan City has adequate services and facilities. Review and update the Morgan City Emergency Management Plan. Continue to assess demand for police and fire protection and provide additional facilities when and where required. It's kind of boilerplate language. But I don't know if you have any specific thoughts on Lance, you know, the public, services and facilities better than anybody. What are we missing here? On that, here's the last two part of this, continue to assess in providing and maintaining high quality education and adequate facilities and opportunities for all levels. Monitor the socioeconomic structure and needs of the community, encourage the fulfillment of those needs through either public agencies or private organizations. Education kind of runs on their own. And so that's typically not in the general plan other than maybe coordination. Any thoughts on what's provided on public facilities? Are there specific things that really need to be done for city services? That should be in the general plan.
My only comment is that language seems so broad and generic that it doesn't really serve any purpose at all.
I
What
agree.
exactly are we planning here?
This whole thing with the generic boilerplate, New York City, I got no comment on it.
Yeah, this chapter a lot was very boilerplate. Could apply anywhere.
Usually have a lot of reading kind of stuff. I've got one drawing.
So this comes back to you, Lance, then. Tell us, if Public Works had a magic wand, what would they do over the next decade?
Well, it isn't so much a magic wand, it's a little deeper pockets that are being limiting. I mean, this city's made strides in working towards upgraded water tank that will, I believe, put us well on our way to having water supply for complete build out of the city limits.
You need a new water tank?
Yeah, and it's in the works.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that was talked about in council here a month or, yeah, not long ago. Right on down to as things grow out and build and change, I think that comes right down to a lot of your park space. It's an ongoing battle. Dogs crap in the cemetery, so we restrict dogs from the cemetery, but then where do you go take your dog to walk? My kind of personal wish list, I'd love to see your. Yeah. Our future bridge that's there'll be a pre-construction meeting on that bridge in about 2.5 weeks. That'll completely change Tony's walking patterns. The trail will tie in from the end of Commercial Street. I mean, little stuff like that. Kind of my 10-year plan where I'm trying to figure out how we get a trail or walking path out of the island road. As far as utilities and stuff, you got aging infrastructure that we just try to prioritize what needs next. I think we're in better shape than a lot of places. I was in a meeting last week about some EPA regulations coming down on lead and copper in the water. And when we start comparing to some of those other cities, we're in okay shape compared to some. You go a lot of places I think we've done well with our roads. They're in better shape than a lot of places.
And funding's increased for roads.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, it has. And
Some steps to increase funding for where that bridge comes over up to that bus gap. How far is that? Where's the city?
just about the end of the bus garage going towards the fairgrounds, right almost at there.
City wants to talk. Feels like you've got the momentum of the next mile coming up. Absolutely. And then you got that new bridge. So I think that'd be a transition. Finish that on the way up to the.
Yeah.
We've actually got a grant money to work on
Is that right here?
a park.
Yeah.
we're not sure what we want to do over there, but
Yeah,
We've got the
your,
money
if I can
to-
show you, your trail's gonna come, your trail's gonna come from here, wind back to here. It'll cross the bridge and then it'll carry on. And whether we try and sneak behind the bus garage or come out here, it'll go and meet right into the county line. So. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't have to talk with private, it's already.
Well, and my next big tie-in dream for a trail, I had the lady that owns the property matter and be at me here a couple years ago. What do you mean you're gonna put a trail through my ground? I says, well, it will probably be someday when you sell, there'll be a trail through there. And oh, okay, you're not gonna make me do a trail? I said, absolutely not. I'm sure you do. So.
Okay.
It's just planning for the future to make sure we keep those areas open and, but a lot of the stuff from the city, we're on our way with a lot of them.
Okay, we'll simplify that one. Policy 5, ensure planning and resources are in place to maintain. Yeah, critical infrastructure. Are you good with policy 5 as is? I mean, I added stormwater and internet to plans. Well, you already have. I mean, internet plan was recently done and is
Yeah.
implemented, right? I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be done there, but
all of that is just happening as a development is just added.
okay.
So it's available everywhere. Yeah.
Oh, I'm jealous. You have a lot faster internet than I have. Okay, so we're about out of time on this work session. The final chapter is going to be parks, open space and recreation next month. And well, I'll just say the rest of 6 is all data. Okay, do you want to? We can come back to it later in the meeting. I think he's meaning in the actual chapter. Okay, well, I think it would be good just to, I can take photos of all your pages, put that in there. And really the chapter 6, the rest of it is just, it's data, it's maps, all that. I don't know that we need to discuss it unless you feel that we do. I don't think you do, but if you do, then we can, but I would want everybody's comments so I can add them to this PDF, which will go back to the consultant that worked on it and ask them to fix it and get things right.
Roe caught up with me, had a little chat with me. And what he's running up against is he's getting some written complaints having to do a lot with travel trailers being lived in, multiple cars being parked in front of homes where rooms were being rented. And he's feeling a sense of helplessness because he said there is absolutely nothing on the books I can do about it. He says, I could take care of something as far as cars on the street because of some, ordinances we have in place. And so I guess speaking to someone from the city councils, at some point, we really do need to take a hard look at accessory dwelling units and what we want to allow and what we don't want to allow. Because right now he's having a difficult time enforcing anything because there's nothing on the books out there. So you know,
Are you talking about nightly rentals?
I'm
or-
talking about, I have a home across, this is a little bit of a personal pet, but I have a home right across the street from me. There's a 14-foot travel trailer out in the backyard that somebody's living in permanently. He says that's not the only place he's running into this in the city. I know across the street from my house, that same home, they're not renting a basement, they're renting rooms. And now whether or not we allow that or not, I don't know. But the point is there's nothing out there as far as anything on the books or the ordinances right now that give him anything to work with, you know, other than I went and looked, I'm sorry, there's no ordinance out there that deals with this. So, I mean,
So just
Well-
like, we've, as staff, we've looked at several different items. And speaking with Jake, we have them on a list. And so we went ahead and prioritized. So that's why we are working tonight on the overlay, because we have an applicant that's interested in doing the overlay. Then we'll be moving into accessory dwellings. Short-term rentals will be after that. So those are on there.
You know, just quickly, as far as the trailer goes, I mean, obviously it's a land use.
So we prioritize, we're going through the overlay, and we'll go, and then we put accessory next, and then short-term right after. So
Yeah,
we could put them on, but we were trying to prioritize them because to dump them in all at once is a little, we want to finish up and go from one after another. So.
yeah, I think so. And when we get back in session, let's have, if we don't mind, have Steve has a comment on what was said.
Okay. Does everybody take their microphone? Please have a seat and then the problem. Then you go on.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's session of our Planning Commission meeting. Today is December 20th. I'd like to welcome everyone here who's joining in person and those that are with us through Zoom. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and streamed live. So be aware of that as we go through tonight's session. For those of you that are here, I didn't catch your name, I apologize, but hopefully you had a chance to sign in as you walked in. Thank you for that. Before jumping into our agenda, we had one carryover comment by Mr. Garside from our work session. I just want to make sure we captured what your thought was before we jump into our general session. And Steve, I don't know if you caught that cue there. I was turning it over to you. All right, we'll come back to you. Tonight's session, we have two sets of minutes to approve. The minutes from our October 18th meeting that took place, as well as our special session on November 8th. I was not present at the November 8th meeting. I have read through those minutes, but for those two sessions, hopefully everyone's had a chance to look through them. At this point, I would call for any revisions, edits, and or a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve them, both of them, the 18th and the 8th.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, indicate. It's unanimous. The minutes are now approved. Thank you for that. We have 3 agenda items, just so everyone's aware, we will be making one change to the order of the agenda. We'll be swapping item number 2 and item number 3. We will start with the project that's taking place on 412 East, 125 North, Suite B. This is in regards to signage that is inside of the historical overlay zone. So this is I believe the Little Lube building, or the old Valley implement, for those of us who've been around for a while. Let's turn it over to Jake just to give a quick overview, and then we'll continue our discussion.
Thank you. Okay, so our first item is for a sign permit. And the reason this is before the planning commission is that because it's in the historical overlay zone. Otherwise, it would just be a staff review and approval. I've got it right here. I can just screen share. Okay, we'll do that. So this is what was included in your packet. Address is, I don't have it memorized, but it is on 125 North. I know I included it. Oh, it's down below. That's right. Just a second here. So address is 412 East, 125 North, Suite B. It is in the central commercial and historic overlay zone. And that what has been provided by the applicant who's here tonight who can answer questions when called upon. It does show that it meets all the requirements of the city sign ordinance and also the commercial. I don't think I need to go through that, but this graphic on your screen kind of shows you what it is. It's a sign that's mounted on the building. It's a thin sheet of metal on the building, and it does meet the size requirement, the location on the building in terms of the height above the sidewalk. The lighting that is provided is acceptable, the downward lighting. So all those requirements are met. My one recommendation was if the facade could be repaired with from the previous. Is that part of the plan? And this is Kurt, by the way, he's the applicant.
Yeah, Kurt Haywood representing. So we are leasing this building from Gary Little, who is the unit owner.
Yeah.
And so that facade out front has been that way ever since Napa has moved out. And so I think those are previous holes that have been stuccoed or patched since that sign has been removed. And so that's been over 8 years ago or longer. I don't have the exact date, but it's approaching 10. So about a decade of that. So we have a really good relationship with the business owner. And I would agree that getting a general contractor or just having a way to finish that off and then a fresh coat of paint will definitely make that appearance a lot better, more appealing within the historic district. And so it's something that I have to take up and work with Gary Little, who's the owner of the building.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. Any questions from the planning commission? Here, here's the sign, here's the lighting, nice fixture shining down on it. But as I reviewed it, it's very straightforward, and I included a lot of information in there, more than you probably needed, but it
It's
is in the
very, very
applicant.
informative, with all the pictures and sizing and how that aligns with the ordinance. Thank you. Appreciate that. And thanks for the overview. Let's take a moment as members of the commission and discuss any concerns with respect to how that proposed signage lines up with the provisions of the overlay zone, and then we can take some action from there. So what are your thoughts or questions? Go ahead, Jay. It looks like you had your hand up.
Just my only comment on that is, being very specific as far as the staff notes go, and the summary comment number 2, subjective, stucco hose being repaired and frontage in good condition. I don't know if that's fair to really anybody, the interpretation of that. And so if we could just be more specific of what we're asking there, I think that would help everybody to identify, if it's, make sure the texture matches on the stucco and the paint and the color is consistent or something, as opposed to just good, is my only recommendation.
So would that be something in my mind that if we're approving this, that'd be part of the approval, that would be included as part of that motion to approve? That's my question.
Yes, you would want to be specific, and Jay made a good point in terms of a report being a little more specific on something like that.
Now, this is in the historical zone.
Correct.
Okay, we spent a lot of time in the past about colors. Is that an issue here? We have a color palette, I think, that we recommended, and so we have to ask that question where we've asked other people to live by that. Is this within the palette of the colors that we recommend?
Where the applicant doesn't own the building and is not asking to change the facade of the building and is just requesting to mount a sign, would that be a completely separate issue?
Yeah, I didn't see it that way in terms of my interpretation, where it was just for the sign, and the sign met both historic and the sign ordinance.
I just
And
asked the question.
truthfully, this building is not that historic or old, right? It's not like the old hotel and other ones that have significant architectural history in the city as well.
Just wanted to ask the question.
And I'm going to ask Teresa if she has any thoughts on that.
Mark, just a clarification, in the past when we were looking at that color palettes for the facade of the building and not necessarily the signage. When Mr. Summercorn was our planner at the time, he had said there's a difference on that. The signage, we'll probably have to read it, what the exact verbiage, but it just says the signage should complement the building and not be, and that's it. The building itself should be in the historic palette that is in the ordinance and limited to 2 colors.
And when we looked at the building, the facade on the old hotel a few months ago, they did provide a color palette, and that was part of that process. I think that's a great clarification, probably for all of us to.
Related
go
to that
through.
clarification, I like what Aaron was saying too, that the applicant's coming to us as, for the sign. The rest of the facade, like the holes, we'd like those to be fixed. Just cosmetically, it makes sense, and I think it's a good thing. But is that within scope of what we're doing tonight as far as a sign goes? And the applicant is not the owner of the building. I'm just curious how to approach that. In other words, is it just about the sign or are we adding in other things in the facade like the holes? Because I agree that those need to be treated maybe separately.
Well, one thing that the commission has the authority to do is when someone comes and wants to make a, comes to you under the authority of the ordinance, the commission has a chance to ensure that the rest of the property is in compliance with the codes. And so, yeah, you do have the authority, the ability to do things such as that, even though it is the tenant, because then the tenant goes back to the landlord and said, hey, if you want this to work, then we've got to bring your building up to code.
Okay, so that's helpful. Thank you, Steve. I'm curious, the holes that we're seeing in the picture that's displayed right now, that what sign was, did we pull that off just barely? That the old sign, or has that been there for several occupants of the building?
I don't know that.
I don't know how many occupants have been in this building, but I know it sat vacant almost as a storage facility for Gary Little for some time. And we're now 5 years occupying this building and without a sign. And so we feel like it's finally time to advertise and show the community that we're here to stay and grateful for their support. But as far as the holes, they are filled. There's nothing that is, divots that are exposed. In the stucco, they are filled, but I think it's the color tone, more gray, standing out in that picture. And it is visible to the naked eye when you're walking along the street. That being said, we do want to have our facility looking the best that it possibly can. And it has been an eyesore for us as a tenant. So Gary Little's great to work with, and happy to take this matter up as he's worked with us collectively on some other projects as well on the inside of the building with HVAC systems, et cetera. But yeah, I as the tenant I am coming to you just about the sign for tonight's approval.
Thank you. Thank you for your commitment to the business and being there as long as you have. It's good that you want to continue improving this. So thank you. What other questions or discussion items do we have before we?
I just had one question. I'm assuming that the blue and the light blue, the metal letters, there's no backing for the whole sign. It's just the individual words and letters, correct?
Yeah, Lance, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I assumed, but looking, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't kind of trying to color match a backing plate to old stucco. But that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. So
Yeah, it's a metal sheet with a digital print overlay. It comes in 2 sections, but that is the dimensions of how it's going to be mounted. And it is following just a 2-color scheme. It's not a silver metal, but it is more of like a beige cream digital overlay that is more or less, not making sure that it blends with the facade
close as you
of the
can
building.
get.
Yeah, so it doesn't dip into like a 3-color scheme that we're trying to get approval. Nothing crazy there.
So just to clarify, if I may, on what you're asking, that aluminum component, that's the full rectangle, including all the print, right? It's not just a cutout of the letters that get applied to the wall.
Yeah, you are correct. It is a full aluminum sheet of metal and not just the letters.
Okay.
That's correct.
So the aluminum, is it colored in any way, or is it a reflect? Are we gonna see like a bright silver shiny thing as we drive by?
No. Yeah, in fact, no, it does not reflect. It's not silver. What you see, Jake, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down to the photo of that sign there, what you see there is about the color of the digital overlay. And like, again, it's more of like a beige cream that blends in with the stucco that doesn't reflect. And then we're just following the blue and the lighter blue two-color scheme.
And that's what I thought. That's helpful. Thank you. I just got confused because when you asked, I thought it made it sound like he wasn't trying to match the stucco. Use the eyedropper tool.
Well, actually this will make the sign pop out. If it matched, then it would blend away. But I think it's gonna be complementary and not dramatically different.
All right, what else?
Mr. Chair, you want me to make a motion?
I'd welcome. a motion.
Okay, great. I'd like to make a motion and planning commission recommend to the city council as part of the sign permit,
Correction, in this case, you're actually approving.
Yes.
make a recommendation to approve the sign permit application. With a recommendation that the existing building stucco exterior coating be consistent in its appearance as far as the repairs to the previous holes that were previous.
Thanks, Jay. Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
All right, appreciate that. Before voting, let's discuss if there's any discussion points on the motion on the table. All right, let's go ahead and vote. The motion is stated. I'll try to recap, don't want to mess it up. But motion to approve with the recommendation to also make the stucco backdrop all be consistent. So the holes and repairs aren't visible. If I didn't mess that up, that's what the motion is.
So you're saying if the stucco's not improved and fixed, the sign can't go up?
I recommend it be approved. I recommend it be done with the approval.
Ray, what that is, that's a recommendation. It's not a requirement. How it was said.
So
So the permit is approved and now Kurt can take to the landowner and say that the city has asked or recommended that we, paint the stucco and get it repairing and looking good.
do we have the authority to word that differently and make that not a recommendation, but a requirement of the approval? Is that even an option?
Steve, I think you could, but because that's the motion, I think it's fine.
Well, I mean, we haven't approved, we haven't voted on it yet. We could still have options. What this discussion's about.
Yeah, it is a code requirement that, that the exterior of these buildings be maintained. And so, yes, it could be a requirement.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Any other discussion about this? All right. Oh, you're gonna say something?
I agree with sign totally. I agree with sign totally. I think they do a good job. The sign's gonna be open. They got a good business going there. But I'm uneasy tying it to the landowner fixing his building. I'm uneasy with that, tying it to that.
How the motion was stated, it's a recommendation. It's not a requirement. It's a request from the planning commission to the owner. It's not
The applicant
requirement.
The applicant can proceed if this
Yeah,
motion's
he-
approved as is.
He can
applicant's
proceed
fine.
as is and take the recommendation to the building owner.
Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion as outlined, please vote. looks unanimous. Motion passes. Thank you, Kurt, for your time.
So we'll get you that permit. So Teresa will handle that, right?
We will now transition to our second agenda item, which you may recall we are swapping from item number 3 to item number 2. So we will move into, once we open the public hearing, this is an ordinance amending Title 10, Chapter 10.32 of the Morgan City Code regarding the posting of campaign signs in the public rights of way. And there's more detail in this that we can certainly talk about. One of the changes, as I understand it, and look at the red line language, is a technicality wherein the provision allowed for signs in public rights of way, but it only talked about if there was a sidewalk and curb and gutter. What's being added is the provision that makes this also appropriate, even if there is no curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and then how that would play out. So that's the change in the language that we'll be talking about in this part of the public hearing. We do need to open the public hearing first, and I just had a brain freeze. Steve, is this something that we open with a motion, or do I declare it open?
It can be done either way.
We don't have any members of the public in the room or in the Zoom. Hopefully we can get someone that watches this later, but I'm just going to go ahead and declare the public hearing open at this point so that we can have the discussion. That being said, it may be good to get staff's perspective and on anything that was more detailed than what I just summarized. So I don't want to oversimplify what we're doing here with the language in the ordinance. But Jake, if you wouldn't mind sharing staff's perspective.
I actually didn't work on this one. I don't know if Steve did or if we need Teresa.
I did not. And I mean, obviously it's a simple clarification, kind of. And so I read that. I didn't have much of a concern with it. You just have to be aware, eventually we'll have to revisit the sign ordinance in its entirety. Once you begin to list signs of either, defining them by content, then it becomes a little bit problematic. But this is okay. I would just consider this to be a temporary fix. I understand the objective of it. And just that, like you said, at a future time when we revisit the sign ordinance, we'd probably have to take off the designation campaign signs. Basically, unfortunately, what happens is that during the campaign season, most jurisdictions just kind of turn a little bit of a blind eye because they don't want to get into a political fight. So there's a little bit more leniency during the campaign season. But again, we can't regulate signs based on their content other than commercial, basically commercial versus non-commercial speech. But with that said, just to put that note in the back, that thought in the back of your head, that will come and change this at a later date. But other than that, I don't know where this came from. I didn't draft it, but like I said, it fixes the concern that you have.
So Teresa, you may have more of the background then. Would you mind sharing? I'd like to hear two things. One, what the impetus was, why this became a thing that we need to address now. And then the second one is maybe why pursue it since the campaign season's now over, at least for that season. Would it make more sense to draft a permanent fix instead of a temporary fix? And I don't know.
Okay, so how it came about is a complaint during the last recent election. As there were signs in the city due to the fact of the school district had an election. And the complaint, when addressed in the ordinance, was that the verbiage just was not very clear. And so with that in mind, our election official is Denise Woods had worked with Gary Crane on how can we fix this a little bit. At this time, we are going into an election season, aren't we? This coming year, so. We didn't discuss a permanent fix, more of a language correction. And because it's in the land use ordinance, planning commission is to do a recommendation and not just to the city council.
Say that last part again.
And because it's in the land use section of the code, everything in the land use has to come through
Sure.
planning commission first.
Sure, okay. So I guess the other question, thank you. The second question then is about why temporary versus permanent. What would more permanent language look like? Like what are we not solving that we're kicking down the road?
Basically, it would be just revisiting the ordinance in its entirety. I mean, you know, do you have just have to look at the regulations. Basically, you just want to treat signs the same. Again, the distinction between commercial and non-commercial speech, but for example, sometimes they'll say, well, you know, you got a campaign sign out there and there's not a campaign season. And someone will say, well, guess what? You allow campaign signs, that's political speech. So I'm leaving my sign out there because it's political speech. And so those are just some of the things that we need to look at look at the ordinance in its entirety, just for consistency purposes. But again, this addresses the issue at hand. And going through the sign ordinance in its entirety is not an easy process.
Would that always stay within the land use section of the code? So regardless of what's changed, it'll still be part of the planning commission's responsibility to recommend?
Yes, because that's one of the bases on which we can make that distinction between commercial and non-commercial speeches under our authority to regulate land uses.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's seeing as the public is not overwhelmingly weighed in on this one. Yeah, I think that's appropriate. And again, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed at this point. And then we will take this up as a commission. So public hearing is now closed. And for those of us here on the rostrum.
And as a point of order on that one, you actually do need a motion to close it, not to open it, but to close it and to make that final motion. Sorry.
See, I was letting the power get to my head.
I know. I was just, I'm trying to, I'm confusing you on some of these issues and I apologize for that. But yeah, the closing of it will need to be by a motion.
Fair enough. Let's do it right. Thanks, Steve.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to close this public hearing.
Thank you. Is there a second on the motion? All right, Ray is second of the motion. All in favor? Public hearing is now closed with a unanimous vote. Thanks for keeping us in line, Steve. As a commission now, let's take action, which would be to make a recommendation at this point to the city council to take this up. So in one way or another on how we feel about this. So that's where we're at. Any discussion on this particular item?
So I just want to be clear, exactly what are we changing in the verbiage and wording?
So I don't know if we have anything soft copy that we can put on the screen, but I'm gonna show Mark this paper here.
Teresa, I don't have that. Do you have it?
So
I can explain it real quick. I mean, just the way that they allowed campaign signs, it just says between the street frontage, if there's curb and gutter, and it never addressed the issues in some of the areas in the city where there's not a curb and gutter. There's no property, there's nothing between a sidewalk and a curb and gutter because those don't exist. So this would simply allow those campaign signs to be next to the road on someone's property where there's not curb, gutter, sidewalk.
And I probably should have clarified when I sent it out to you. Normally, when we're amending or modifying a ordinance, it'll be underlined the new language and it'll be struck out what language is taken out. And so everything else is what's already in the code.
Thank you. So that's what's being changed is we're adding the provision that even if there is no curb and gutter, everything that previously was written in the ordinance still applies.
You know, when you go on your walk and you walk past Heiner's house and the sidewalk ends in front of her house before you get to the curb, I think it just says, like, clarifying, it can go there, but just make sure you're 5 feet away from the road, right? That's it.
So, yeah, it's a minor change just to accommodate that particular scenario.
Thank you.
Other discussion items before we call for a motion to make a recommendation one way or another. Let's move forward then. Would someone be willing to take action on this?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a positive a motion to recommend to the city council on an ordinance amending chapter 10 or title 10, chapter 1032 of the Morgan City Code regarding the posting of campaign signs in public right of ways as presented.
Thank you, Lance. Is there a second to the motion? Ray seconded the motion. Any discussion before we vote? Let's vote. All in favor of the motion as outlined, indicate. I'm seeing unanimous. Motion passes for a favorable recommendation for the city council to take this up. Thank you. We'll now move to our final agenda item, which is in relation to the mixed housing overlay zone. We received additional information that was clarified, I believe, this morning as a commission to facilitate this part of the discussion. We've talked about this for a few sessions before, and we can go through this. And this is more of a working component to see how comfortable we are with the language at this point and any other considerations. So I'm going to turn it over to Jake to kind of highlight this section and take us through.
Thank you, Chair. And so what this is at the request of the council and the planning commission from a previous city council meeting, it was recommended we prepare the zoning ordinance. This is a draft. Been working on this for a while, but a few additional things need to be added and some things came up the last couple of weeks. And so I apologize for a little bit last minute, but I do want to today just go through the main ideas of it and have a discussion. Certainly we're not approving anything tonight. This is all about discussion of the main ideas. And the purpose of this zone is it's an overlay zone. So we're not going to apply it anywhere on the zoning map. Essentially, a developer would come in with an application, a site plan, an open space plan, some other requirements as part of it. And then they would apply and we would have a public hearing. You would consider the plan and approve it at the same time. You want to, yes.
So an overlay is different than an overlay. In the sense, like our historical overlay zone is boundaries to where that applies, even though it's an overlay. Are we saying that this is boundaryless and anywhere in the city limits this could apply? Or do we have to define specific areas?
It could go either way. It could, but I think we don't pre-apply it. However, we could exclude areas where it's not permitted. This has been prepared in mind from to being south of the freeway, more of the flat areas of the city. Maybe it can work on the hillside, maybe not. I'm not sure about that, but I will say I recommend it as not applied to a specific area. It's kind of like a PUD ordinance that it's an overlay that could be applied to certain areas. And maybe we just say it's applicable to, when we list the zones that it could be applied. Yes. Yes, and then however, we may want to exclude like the manufacturing, that would make sense to exclude the manufacturing area and certain other ones. But I think some of that, as we work through it, I mean, you'll understand the vision of the ordinance, and then where we use it will come after.
Well, just follow that same comment. It says here includes residential and home businesses. So does that mean commercial and industrial is not included? You
Right.
just said it could be included. So help me understand which it is.
So the uses of within the zone. So meaning once the zone has been applied and is built, the land uses are essentially it's residential, meaning people can live there or they can have their home business.
Right.
It's not a mixed use zone. Those are good tools, but not appropriate. This is for residential.
This does not apply to commercial or industrial.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So
Okay, so the idea behind the mixed residential overlay, and if we want to rename it, I'm open to that as well. But the idea is it's a mixture of housing types, that you don't just build one type of housing, you have to build multiple at least. It's an infill tool. That's the idea of it, that it can infill that particular project we looked at, but also other properties throughout the city. You'll see here on the first page, it applies to 3 to 10 acres. That's very specific. 3 because 3 is big enough that you can have a project worthwhile, and a maximum of 10 in that you don't end up with a very big project. I use 10 because 10 is kind of the standard Utah block, like Salt Lake City are 10-acre blocks, which is a good size project, but not too big. I did think about maybe 8 acres as well, but certainly there's a range there. And so that it's not a master plan community or large subdivision or something like that.
Still just a little bit confused. Are we talking about multiple scenarios for this overlay, or are we only talking about undeveloped land, whether it's infill project or whatever, but we're not talking about in doing something mixed use and residential. There's already a house there, and now they want to also have a commercial operation at the same time. Like, we're only talking about a parcel of land that's got nothing on it, that's 3 to 10 acres and a new project, and then we do it like this, or is it
Yes.
both?
Yeah, and it's not mixed use in terms of commercial and residential. It is just residential. If there were some existing buildings that were going to be demolished, houses or commercial, then those could go
So we're
away.
basically just talking about mixed densities and mixed project types, but all residential.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'm with you now. I'm
Okay.
following.
So 3 to 10 acres. And what I was thinking is I'll just kind of go through the big ideas here and then let's go back, so keep in mind things that you want to debate.
One more
Yeah.
quick question to that. Say, I'm just thinking like the last several developments that have kind of came in the city. We may come in. Wouldn't consider it a master plan community, like when you look at where they build an entire new city out in what once was the desert. But what happens if we come in and someone's got 14 acres or 15 acres?
Then then they would have to cut it down in size.
So they would have to cut it down and do could they do two developments side by side that were this?
They
Like I say,
could.
I think some of the, as farmers sell off, as I kind of look out through there, I think a lot of our things probably will be over that 10-acre size potentially.
And
hadn't
and
thought
that's
of it
okay.
that way.
This is very intentional not to be too big. And they would have to phase that. However, we've had discussion of next year starting an ordinance for a master plan community. And that's intended for the bigger properties. That's a little bit more encompassing. That's, maybe the dairy and some other bigger properties. Maybe we would want to send them to the master plan community ordinance. Yeah, incorporate commercial too, trail system, more parks, things like that.
So it's mentioned earlier that, as we were talking about adding an agenda item down the road with accessory dwelling units and those kinds of things, that the way that was put on future agendas based on prioritization. And I guess I have that same question for this one, just maybe refresh my memory. Do we have a specific project right now that's making this the first thing that we tackle? As far as mixed goes. So this is mixed residential. We have had working sessions previously about this. We've had also working sessions previously about mixed use across zones beyond residential with commercial and so on. And so I'm curious if we're solving a problem for today based on a need that's come into the city. I want to make sure that other stuff's still in scope. Not to-
Yes, this is regarding a specific, remember there was a townhome project that came in. Planning Commission didn't like. We had already discussed this tool. We asked the developer to pause while we prepare this ordinance. And so that he could look at it.
Okay. It's vague, but I remember now. Yeah, that one. Okay.
Yeah.
How much that zone residential?
What's that?
How much that zone residential?
So that was it was all townhomes and then part of it's commercial.
How much was zone residential?
None. It's all commercial.
Let's
There was a
see.
rezone part of it, but I can't remember. I think
It's a 4-acre parcel. The parcel was rezoned because we didn't have mixed housing options or even a mixed commercial.
Yeah, it does. They would come in, they could do it for this whole space right here.
They don't own it.
4
But part of that acreage is already allocated for commercial, right?
Yeah, however, it doesn't make sense for commercial because there's no frontage on it.
Well, I thought the point was that they're building the road and the access into it. There's already that road that goes past Napa down there. At some point, some of those residences and next to north from Fast Flowers, those may have other access points. In other words, I just want to make sure that we're addressing the right things.
If the residential acreage isn't even 3, we put this through, still won't change that. plan.
They could just apply for it'd basically be 2 rezones at the same time. Apply for the base to become use the overlay zone or the overlay could apply for commercial. I think there's no problem with that. Because it's once you get the mixed overlay, then it's residential. Ray, you're crossing wires here. So let's just say this was built and you live there. The uses allowed would be residential and home business. Meaning you couldn't go ahead and start a business and do all that. Yeah, and then once this overlay happened, it would sit on top of that and govern it. And maybe at the same time, they would just rezone the base below it as well. Because, so overlay zone, base zoning, and so they would just change the base zone and the overlay at the same time.
Your lay zone doesn't apply.
It's the total project size.
So if the total project is 10 acres,
So
and
it's,
5 of it is commercial, you're telling me the overlay zone can go on top of the commercial.
so the minimum is 3 acres. So all parcels combined in the project would be 3 acres or bigger, 3 to 10 acres.
The underlying zoning would be all, it has to all be the same. It has to be a residential zone for the underlying zoning.
Lost my mouse, but I'm-
I mean, it is that way, but that could be changed. It could be changed in 2 ways. It could be changed in this ordinance, or it could be in this draft, or it could be changed. They could apply for a rezone for the base zone at the same time.
So I don't have those notes in front of me. What action did we take when this project did come up? Did we approve the rezone? So okay. So it's still,
It's been tried 2, 3 times. These are.
so it's still commercial. It's still commercial. Today, that property is still commercial, all 4 acres.
So just a background on that is that, it was commercial. What the intent of the overlay zone is that, like we were talking, is this overlay zone isn't gonna be in a specific area, because we'll have a parcel that is over multiple zoning areas, and we get hung up that we can't do certain things with the whole project because this little tiny section might be in a commercial, but yet doing mixed housing in that area would be beneficial. The underlying, you could leave the underlying zones the same as what they
Yeah.
are and keep the overlay is by parcel. And then once you apply the overlay, it stays that way.
So I'm kind of thinking about.
I think you're
approaching
getting
this-
stuck in the cogs here.
Well.
If you let me
well,
kind of
let me
work
finish.
through the vision
I'd
of this,
like
you'll
to-
understand
I
it.
have the floor. I'd like to kind of take this in 2 different ways. One way is let's plan with just as you outlined, with the big picture in mind, with the future in mind. I don't want to get too caught up in the existing project, but my fear is that project is not being addressed with this, nor that the initial conversation with that particular zoning and how that fits in with the master plan and the proposed master plan. It's all part of the conversation. Now that it's starting to come back to me, fits in. So I just want to make sure that what we're talking about, and we can go through specific details. Should it be 3 acres, 10 acres, 2 acres, 15 acres? I mean, those I realize are some of the cogs that you're talking about. And I'm not as concerned about that as I am just understanding what we're doing. And that is big picture.
Mhm.
And it's not clear to me how it works, how the overlay works. So maybe that's the part you can help. I'll speak for myself. You can help me with is this overlay. I've heard, or what it sounded like to me, that, both ways, that it only applies to residential, but then it applies to commercial and residential, but then it only applies to residential again, and then it applies to specific parcels. So I'm confused because I feel like I'm hearing different answers with the way the questions are being asked. So I'm just looking for the clarity.
Okay, so the uses within the zone, meaning once it's built, are residential. So once this type of development is built, residential and whatever is allowed in the city within residential uses, which is basically residential and home businesses. There may be some other minor ones to look at. So once it's built, the uses that are allowed within that. And then the second question is, where can it be applied? And I think, that is a discussion question. It's intended to be residential. In this case, we have a commercial area that wasn't completely fit commercial, the right fit for commercial. And essentially we have split zoning on a property. And so, or an area. And so I'm open to whichever way we want to do that. Do we want to allow it in commercial areas? I think that may be appropriate, or would we want the applicant to, rezone the base zoning, which they could do at the same time, so the base zoning is matching? Does that help?
It helps a little. I mean, I prefer the former in that scenario, but, I mean, can someone explain it to me? Like, not Jake, but anyone else? Can someone else explain it to me so that I understand it? And it's not, I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm just curious.
Let's take this project off the table. Let me ask you a couple questions, Jay. Another piece of ground, maybe another city, whatever, how this applies in general. I think I understand. If it's zoned residential and you have a 5-acre spot, this overlay zone, if approved, would fit that 5-acre spot of a residential zoned area.
Correct.
You can okay on that part.
Okay.
Okay, the next scenario, if a person owns a piece of ground and he's got a 10-acre piece, right down the middle split, we have 5 acres is in industrial, 5 acres in residential. He applies this zone. Does it apply to the whole 10 acres or just to 5 that's residential?
Well,
Overlay.
yeah. So in that case, I mean, how I would write it is that it would not apply to the industrial. So if they wanted to do the entire 10 acres, then they would need to rezone the base zoning,
So
at the same
you're saying
time.
the overlay would just be on the 5 acres that was residential.
or they rezone the industrial to be residential and apply for the overlay at the same time.
So what I just heard you say is that the overlay zone cannot overlay on commercial or industrial ground, zone ground, just gonna overlay over top of residential zone, the residential zone.
Yes. And I mean, this is a discussion, right? Nothing's written.
Well, that's your, I mean, that's, you have a bigger viewpoint than we do. I'm just trying to understand what the viewpoint is, what the ramifications are. To
Yeah.
me, it's a whole different world if the overlay zone can sit on top of residential only, or if the overlay zone can sit on top of commercial, industrial, and residential at the same time.
Yeah, it was intended for residential, but there are some places like this that are commercial that aren't necessarily the best fit for commercial.
That's what he's saying.
And so they would need to rezone. I want to hear what Steve's thoughts are on that part of the base zoning and the overlay compatibility in terms of residential, commercial.
Well, yeah, you're gonna have to decide what your objective is. If this was the way that I read this, and I thought that the focus of this was going to be more infill projects than new projects, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so we did this a little bit with I don't know if there's enough members on the planning commission that will recall when we were starting to get some applications for flag lots, and we wanted to accommodate those, but we didn't want people to so manipulate that option on new development that they could come up with all kinds of, flag lots and additional density. I think there was some concern there. And so we limited the use of flag lots in a similar way. I think it was limited, I think, on the number of lots that were going to be in a new development. And so that's one of the reasons that that this draft narrows the acreage that this can apply to, is so that it's again focused on an infill area as opposed to a new development. And so if you're wanting to get this is like mixed housing, not mixed uses. And so based on that, I would think that the underlying zone would need to be, residential, whether it's single family or multifamily, but I think it would need to be residential. If you wanted to introduce this concept with part of the mixed use, then it could probably be commercial as well. But under the current configuration, I would say that since it is supposed to be an infill project for mixed type of housing, it should be restricted to a residential base zone.
Okay. That is, I agree with that direction. It was kind of where I was going.
I guess, you know, and I think I'm getting better understanding. I appreciate your patience with me. I guess what I'm struggling with a little bit is what problem are we trying to solve? And is it too much ordinance for the job? And those are the questions. You know, I think it makes sense. That's what I'm struggling with. You know, we have something come in and then we throw, you know, a big ordinance at it that's still only a piece of the bigger vision for all of mixed development. So this is mixed residential, a certain aspect of mixed residential, particularly infill development, as opposed to, you know, newer, you know, projects with more of traditional development. So that's I guess where I just want to make sure we're not doing rework that a year from now we're going to look back and think, man, we didn't think that through. I just want to make sure we're thinking it through right now and have a really good understanding of what's being solved.
What is being solved is this gives the city a zoning tool to allow for compact development, but also requires some significant standards, some architectural standards, some open space standards, some building design, some layout standards. And by being an overlay zone, you can require that. It also requires some open space and park, things that the city hasn't done before. And it gives a landowner, developer an opportunity to potentially get some higher densities where they otherwise wouldn't. And also actually requires a mixture of housing types. A lot of them, some of the main themes of the general plan are in this ordinance. And I think it matches some of the discussions we've been having. And the ideas in the standards in this ordinance match what discussions we've had with developers that have come in, and also what the mayor and the council requested as well.
So despite what it might sound like, I'm in favor of the concept. I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear. I can't have a discussion on something if I don't understand it. And that's the only part that's causing me some angst.
But this is the first time, you know, this is the first draft. So this is one step at a time.
If I can expound, is that a word? If I can do that on this, does it fit what I'm doing here? I think when this first came about, I spent some time, put on my city hat for a minute, looking at developments and areas that things were done like this. It's a whole different way than anything the city has ever looked at. I like it. You make a higher density look like it's a lower density. So I think that's some of the idea with this. We had the discussion in a meeting as we were up to approve or with some layer of the process. And we talked with the developer in this meeting about, for concept, but if we worked on this, it is something you would be interested in. And he was. Now, so I think this is a good thing, and I've read through it and there's a lot to wrap my head around. And then to go to what Mayor Little was saying, I think we're looking at this as the project that we first talked about this with. I think what he's meaning is there are 4 acres that the developer owns. About 1.5 acres is zoned residential, and this is just going off of my mapping app on my phone and here, and about 2.53 acres is still zoned commercial. Now, I know I had some heartburn. I felt that as you carry on to whatever direction it is on that side of the river where the directions are wrong, you fill up the whatever Legacy Home, whoever owns that next piece of property, you but Destiny Homes, you build that out. Maybe there would be some room for some kind of a little commercial there still that, you know, you'd get some more traffic through there. And the developer was just using this, oh, we're gonna do this to fund to get the road and infrastructure built for this commercial. And looking at this now, I think they're already gonna want a little bit more for a little bit more residential. I think at this point, you just let them do the whole thing like this. It's just gonna make a nicer development. But I think that's what Mayor Little was meaning, that if we didn't grant them another 2.5 approximate acres that is zoned commercial to residential with the 3 to 10 acres, this wouldn't work here because they only have 1.5 acres of residential currently. We could rezone and give them more if they asked for it, but right now, this overlay wouldn't fit unless we allowed it to fit commercial as well, which it sounded like Mr. Garside was saying he thought it should maybe just be tied to residential. Am I?
Yeah, you're correct. And so in this case, the owner could rezone all or part of his property that's commercial as residential. First step, and then follow through.
They would need to do that in order for this to work for the property.
Yeah, and you can't do co-applications at the same time.
Yeah.
Or the other option is we could just lower the minimum to 1 acre, you know? Maybe if
Well, and
maybe
I've been-
1 acre. As I look at this, it's kind of hard to make it work at 1 acre because there are some requirements in terms of, you know, pocket parks and things
Yeah.
like that.
As I've been scanning around here, just clicking on properties here, looking at some of this infill areas, there's several that are, you know, barely under the 3 that wouldn't work, that would probably be a good candidate for this as well. I mean, but there's a lot that are right in that area. Once you get scanning around on this map, I mean, there is a lot of areas where this could potentially, we recently had we've been working with one property owner on State Street, and they'd have to tear one home down, but I mean, this could actually probably fit well on their property versus doing 2 residential lots if they wanted to do something different. So I think we're close. I mean, like I said, I hate to see another piece of property miss out because of 0.05 acres, but or be under or whatever, because it may be a good fit for some of these other areas. But I think we're on the right track, and those acreages are probably appropriate. And like I say, but back to what Mayor Little was saying, unless the developer came and wanted to rezone the whole thing, this wouldn't work for what they're doing.
What if we put a pin in the acreage, go through some of the other things?
No, I think
and come back to that. So the next thing on this is it actually requires 2 housing types. And we've got one list, which is small single family and medium single family. And there's only really just a couple differences there. And then the other list is a townhome or a 2-family home. And the thing about the 2-family home is, or they're also called twin homes. And a twin home is when you have 2 parcels next to each other and 2 attached. It's basically 2 townhomes and 2 separate parcels. A duplex is 1 parcel with 2 units on it. And that could be an option we could consider as well for the list. Just something to think about is do you want a duplex on one of the lists or not? Meaning that 2 units, but 1 ownership of a land. And one other building type I did think about, I didn't include, was called like a mansion apartment, which is basically, looks like a big house, but then it's 4 units, basically 4 apartments, or condos, 2 and 2, essentially a 4-plex. But I didn't include those because typically that's not a for sale product. And so I did stick with this on it.
In my mind, that the numbers don't work, that will help me understand it. Your second line down, above your red re-up mark.
Yep.
You said, right above that says the housing type shall come from 2 lists. I get that. And it says minimum of 1 house type from each list. Does that mean 1 house or 1 house type?
House type.
Okay, a type. And then the number would be 30% from that house type. Okay.
From each list.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so 30% from each. That way, at a minimum, we're getting 30% units, single family, or 30% townhome. The reality is, it's the single family is going to be the lesser, is probably what most would choose. But it does balance it out. And in terms of land coverage, if a developer was just going to do single family and townhome, it would actually, the land coverage would be in the middle, even though that there would be more townhomes than single family. Does that make sense? Like if you drove through one of these neighborhoods that had something like this, you would see land covering as much single family as townhome, even though there's more townhome units. So the idea here is that you're splitting, requiring a minimum number of both units or building types from these 2 lists. Okay. The next thing is there's 2 ways to orient the buildings. Either they face a street or they face a common green. The common green gives a lot of flexibility in terms of layouts. And it still is nice because everybody opens the door and there's some green space and a sidewalk that takes you to the street. You don't have units behind units that are hidden, or, essentially, if you were to look at a lot of master plan, well-done master plan communities, every home falls in these 2 buckets. Either it faces the street or it faces a common green. Open space requirement is, and really this is about usable open space. And the number I have is 15%. I did also look at 10, but I think 15% works. I've seen that on other projects. And what I really focus is this usable open space. And there's a definition in here of what is usable open space, something that, can be played on, it can be walked through. It's a significant open space. It's not just leftover landscaping.
So that 9, 10, 11 really subsets of 8.
Those should be ABC. Don't worry about don't worry about the formatting here. And in the end, the whole thing will be reformatted because it will go, this will follow, drop in the city code. Any question on the usable open space idea? And really it's, a lot of zoning ordinances require open space, but not very many require a usable open space. I mean, and this is where this is a little bit subjective, and that's intentional because it gives you as the planning commission and the city council the opportunity to approve a project as it comes in, because they have to present a concept plan at the time. And what you're seeing when they present it, you could say, does that have usable open space? Are these future residents going to have a playground, a little place to play, give them a little bit of open space that's built in to this development?
Number 13.
Question on that, or just a, yes?
The usual open space plan must include all the following.
Yes,
So it must include a playground,
yes,
open grass space, recreation, benches, sidewalks, trails, and landscaping.
yes,
That includes it's gonna include all those elements.
yeah. It's not that hard to do though, a little pocket park with a playground, a bench, and it could be a sidewalk or a trail going through and some trees. And then there's other things. These ones, the next one is should consider, that, yeah.
Can have additional.
Yeah, we want them to think about tying into the city's trail system or having a pickleball court or something like that, but we're not requiring it. They do have to provide an open space management plan. So, and
For your number 14.
Yep.
Does it have to be an HOA?
yes,
KCR for maintenance, so
yes,
it's gotta be an HOA then.
there's no other way to do it. I wish there were, because there's always pros and cons with HOAs, but there's no other way. And unless the city wanted to take on this, and what I've seen is typically a 2-acre park is where a lot of cities will start to pick up parks. Anything less than 2 isn't of value, and that is in here.
In a 3 to 5 acres parcel. And I haven't done the math, haven't done that yet. I don't know you'll have that big a park in 3 acres.
You won't. You'll have to be at the 10-acre to actually have a sizable.
Sidewalk park at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it is common for HOAs to have these. This here under number 17 is 25% of the perimeter will be accessible. Sometimes the problem with some of these smaller developments is they have a great little, open space, but it's everybody's backyard together. And if you don't live with that in your backyard, then you don't have access to it. And so the idea is that a portion of it is on the street or the private drive so that others can get in and have access to it. And I like it when these things are also open to the public. The intent is the residents, and you actually do not want off-street parking, because off-street parking means a lot of people could drive in and go there. And so the intent is you live there or you walk there to play. Exactly. And it fits in other places, but this could be a neighborhood out of Daybreak, absolutely. Yep, on a 3 or 10 acre scale. Okay, we are requiring porches here. Again, the intent is that it's an overlay, so we're providing some density, some benefits, but then we're also asking for some basic things that make for a great neighborhood. One of which is a porch. Okay, the next one.
Have the majority, it should foster a majority of owner occupied dwellings. Does that mean that we're creating an environment where that just naturally happens, or is that going to be regulated?
Natural and encourage. And it certainly is the wrong place for that. I'm going to say move the sentence. But your thoughts on that? You cannot actually require ownership of units. Like, there's just no way to do that. The only thing that zoning does allow to encourage that is requiring individual platting of units. So that is something we could put in here if you wanted, is that each unit has to be platted. And once a unit is platted, then it makes it easy to sell it. And a lot of projects are happening now where they'll build entire townhome community or even single family communities without any individual platting, because they're all for rent townhomes, for rent single family.
So you're saying individual platting encourages owner occupied?
Yes. It encourages it, and whether that happens at the end of the approval process, because you have individual units that could be sold, or if it's a sell later on. It basically, it's an extra step that sets them up to sell. But you can't in a zone say these have to be for sell or rent. You can't do that.
If that's the intent, then probably like to see something about the individual planning.
Okay. And would you like to see all units are individually platted or 50% of units are individually platted? I mean, it's,
I feel like I don't have enough experience to answer that question. I don't know what's appropriate.
Just in general, my first thought would be when I think of the term, and I would assume individual platted first comes to mind, doesn't it?
you mean that all of them are?
Yeah.
With these kind of units, it's someone could still own them all and rent them all. However, it does make sense to individually plat. Most developers would probably want to individually plat because that gives them the option to sell.
That's what I would think. Like,
It's basically, when they come in for approval, it's, it's another sheet in the construction document set.
So by requiring porches, it eliminates some of these apartments that I've seen here where all you see is a garage door and the only way to go into the apartment is open the door and go in.
Yeah, that is not allowed in here because the front has to face the street or it has to face a common green, and you're not driving onto common green. Of course, you could come off a street, but having a porch in front of a garage, right, that wouldn't work.
and if I recall,
Think about it for that, but yes, it does that.
to your point, this came up because of that project, and we were like, we're late to the party, but the request was, we changed the direction of your buildings, right? It was pretty simple. It was like, he was going through the process to get his community approved, and we were like, well, what if we had some way to make him change his building face? And so this like all materialized from that, right? Essentially,
Yes, it's
Or
part of,
in coordination with that feedback. So this provides that direction, right? It's like, well, we don't have to ask the next guy to change the way it looks if we have this in place. It's more of a guideline, better guideline.
yes, but as an overlay zone, it's an optional thing. It's not
Right.
a requirement.
Got it.
And so I think in the future, we'll have to look through, how does this work? Do we de-incentivize some of the other existing zones and really encourage people to go to this, incentivize this more if needed kind of thing? Adding in the toolbox and then figuring out how to use. The next one, building variety. This requires that, no two buildings next to each other can be the same. It's a nice way that we don't have to be the architects, but we also can say, you just can't come in with the same elevation drawing, cookie cutter plans, that you have to, the buildings next to each other have to be different. Now, if the project's big enough, you can repeat some buildings. They just have to be farther down. So you're driving down the street and you don't necessarily see one from the other right away.
This is in the same block. Within 400 feet. It's not just talking next door, it's talking the full distance. of the
Yes.
block.
Yeah, so on a single block. Yes.
So just to understand that, because I love the concept. I'm looking at the graphic on the next page, the bottom depiction. And there's 3 buildings there. The 2 on the right, are they identical? No, but I also wouldn't say they look that different either. So
They've got 4 things different.
yeah, so I guess my point is, if we're gonna say that no 2 buildings next to each other that can look the same, we might need to define that a little bit more. So if they change the color of the gutter, but everything else is the same, does it qualifies?
It says they have to have 4 of the 8 elements that are different. List the 8 elements there. We gotta have 4 of them that are different on the bottom.
Architecture, color, roof line.
19 it
Okay.
defines that.
So does that picture meet that requirement? Because maybe we need to tighten that up then, I guess is my point, because those look, I mean, yes, they're clearly different. I can see the differences, but if you're driving by quickly, they look the same.
And in this case, you could see they've got colors different. They do have some windows and doors different. They do, one of them does flip So it mirrors a different way. I would say they at least have three. And in this case, they would need to probably change the brick out for stone or something like that. I mean, these pictures don't necessarily represent the ordinance entirely because,
By the way, I don't have a strong preference. I'm just saying if we want to make that variety more pronounced, then I think we need to be tighter. If we don't care, then that's fine too. But it's just a matter of, I think you could end up with very subtle differences unintentionally if that's all it takes.
okay,
I agree completely with what Nate's saying, and I think that those distinctions are going to be what keeps it from looking like the townhouse development.
okay.
So we may need to look at our language there and yeah, require more distinctive differences.
How would you alter this language then? Do you like the flexibility here? It does give a designer and a builder and developer some flexibility on it.
I think one thing, so you've got, architectural style and floor plan, I think would be the two that we can play with on this. And in other words, those two buildings I'm looking at, the two on the right, they may have they could be the identical building inside. You once you walk inside, it could be the same layout, same everything. And so maybe with that floor plan, like the floor plan can't be the same. And I know you've outlined that, but in this picture, which I realize is just a representation, it's not code enforced, but maybe that would help, right? Just making sure that if that's all it takes to make that happen, because it's hard to make the two houses look identical. If the kitchen in one's in the front and the kitchen and another one's in the back, it's naturally going to be different. But
Yeah, and maybe we change that we say the elevation, the front facade is just a different form.
Yeah.
That may be, because I don't know that we care so much about the inside as we want the outside.
Pitches of roofs could be changed. I look at those three buildings. There's probably a lot of stuff you could do, the pitch of a roof or that would completely change the look of three identical buildings, that you can have the exact same layout, but
maybe
a pitch or maybe a different slope of the porch or whatever. I mean, I don't know how you do it. You'd say contrasting colors, but you don't want this one is this color and this one contrasts, and the next one you go right back to the one before it, but a little more different. Yeah.
And I agree. I think that's the intent of what that variety is supposed to do. And it's just the way it's written must distinctly vary. And I get what's trying to be accomplished there, but that's hard to define.
Okay.
What varies distinctly. And that's why, no, I personally don't care if the two houses next to that have the same floor plan. But I would like them to look differently. So if changing the floor plan makes it look differently, and that's something you can define, then so be it. But if there's a different way to do that better defines what distinctly means, then let's do that too.
Okay, I'm going to add the requirement to provide elevation drawings. So that would come in. Question on that may just have to be a staff approval, because it may be difficult with a 5 or 10 acre to have all the drawings for all the buildings. That's too much for you, I think, for the planning commission to handle, but that would be at the building permit level. They would have to.
Jake can handle it.
They'd have to provide all the elevations on it. Okay, that's good. Building windows. May want to do a little bit more of this, but for a 2-story, the facade facing the street has at least 4 windows. And then the non-front, but street facing like that, you come around the corner, at least requiring 2 windows. Maybe that should be bumped up to 3. You've probably seen some of those townhomes where you see the front, it looks great, and you come around the side, there's almost no windows. just a blank wall. That's what we want to
That's
go
my
with.
concern too about the ones that face a common area. They're beautiful from the front, but when you're driving down the street, it looks like you're driving through storage units. So windows would help with that.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna add a common area facing as here as well. Okay,
Just another consideration to what defines the window? Like, is there a square footage ratio or something? In other words, if they have a little bathroom on the side and, you know, they have the little tiny bathroom windows, does that count? And that's the only thing you see on the whole side of that.
I could put in just a percentage of glass that, there's some good industry ones that basically how much of a facade should be glass for a front and then what's appropriate for a side and a back here. Let's,
The only
let's,
thing- like, the only thing's a bathroom window.
Okay.
Then I don't think we've accomplished it.
okay, gonna add that percentage of glass.
By the way, when I say bathroom window, I'm talking about those little things.
Yeah,
He wants everyone
exactly.
to have great big bathroom windows.
Okay.
Just as somebody brought up the word, the language in here and you said you're going to format this and make it look like and stuff. One of my things is just, since we're talking about language, like the distinction between like single family and multifamily. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times the definition of a multifamily is common walls. Single family, not so much. And so throughout this, there's nuances of, are we talking about single family homes? Are we talking about multifamily homes?
Yes, yes, and yes.
So
And so,
not as much, multifamily term is more a term of multiple dwellings in a single building.
like townhomes are very common to be all in one building. You'll have 4 townhomes in one building.
A lot of times multifamily is used different ways. In some places, it means like stacked on top, like in terms of in a single building. I don't use the term multifamily in this draft at all. We do have these sections on the housing types, and I think that will help. And if we need to clarify some of those, we can.
Yeah, that was just my point, is just the clarification of language, just make sure that it's being used as you accurately.
Okay. So small single family homes. What makes them unique is the smaller lot size. And they must be rear loaded, meaning the garage must be at the back. It's really the only way to do it and make it look good because it's so small. So there's the example there, and you see this picture right here, they're all facing, these ones are facing the common green there, and then other examples facing the street. Yep.
Page 10 gives it the building standards. You're talking about these small single families. They can have a lot width of 30 feet. I'm talking about 7-foot side yards at 14 feet off 30. You'd have a home that's 16 feet wide.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll fix that one then.
That's the thing about these. He has a 3,000 square foot lot. You're talking about a 16-foot wide.
Yeah, the setback needs to be less.
It's gonna have-
Well, there, and that's the minimum.
That's
yeah.
what I want to plan. I want to point out that what it's saying.
And the side setback needs to change and maybe the frontage a little bit as well. Just a little bit though, but we'll get there.
You bring that up to the.
Okay.
See the pictures you go through this. That's what small single family.
This picture you see right here, these are actually 2,000 square foot lots, these homes right here. These are in Farmington. And of course they are, the garages are alleys behind. And okay, so medium single family.
Just want to jump in real quick on our pace. I want to just kind of understand what the expectations are for tonight, or if we're gonna go through all 11 pages, let's make sure that we do that before midnight. So, okay.
And I think what would be helpful tonight is just cruise through it, point out things, quick discussion, then we'll come back with a
Sounds good.
more,
I mean,
you'll have a better understanding, and then I'll have initial feedback, and we'll have an updated version.
we're gonna kind of
Move through.
wrapping up around 9 o'clock or.
Okay.
So
Let's do it.
kind of plan on that.
Okay, medium single family, the biggest difference is that you can have front loaded garages. And there is a place for those, and there is some provisions in here for garages. Here's some examples here with front loaded garages. Pushing them back a little bit. Another example, facing on Common Green.
You got the same concept, you look at the numbers don't work with any of those pictures. You're always talking about 50-foot width wide. You take 14 out, you're only saying 30.
This is a draft, Ray. Let's just work through it, okay?
I'm trying to explain that it does, the piece aren't working in my mind.
Well, that's why we'll fix it. It's not a big deal. Okay, so townhomes, I have up to 5 units per building. Industry-wide, they do go up to 6, but I wanted to bring that down a little bit to kind of have that scale. Some ways I'd almost like it to be less, but there is economy of scale of building that as attached. So that's why we're at 5. Garages must be rear loaded. That gives us a little different design. And in this case, you'll see these are all really good. I mean, this townhome right here, you wouldn't know that that's 3 buildings, that brown and tan one, but that's 3 units. This one on the right, upper right in Park City, also 3 units. And then these ones have more units included. And then twin home is basically 2 townhomes together. There's not necessarily a lot of difference there other than they need a little bit bigger lot size for that. Yeah, 1 common wall.
Would those require the porches as well? Do the porches apply to everything?
Yes. Okay, building materials. 40% minimum of non-glass to have brick, stone, fabricated stone, or hardy board. Just to kind of give, those are the most prized materials.
Those terms is hard.
Fiber cement board is kind of the official name. The next graphic shows how garages can be laid out. This one shows with single family homes, how you can have that front loaded garage. And the one thing on it is you'll notice that the garage must be 4 feet back from the front. So from the very front of the home, you got to push it back 4 feet. And that makes the focus on the architecture of the home and less on the garage of it.
One of the bottom right hand, that's 4 feet back because of the porch out there.
It's 4 feet back because it's not the front. Right.
Outside the front on the other side.
Yeah, because it's a side loaded.
I like that one. I don't think I've seen that.
And then the next one also is alley loaded. And I think I'll change this graphic so you would see townhomes on one half and single family on the other. So people can visualize how does it work for a townhome, and also how does it work for single family. Okay, here we are. And thanks to Ray, we already know a couple of things that need to be updated. So appreciate that. There are some things that need to be fixed a little bit. Certainly the width on the single family needs to be a little wider, and the side setback at 7 may need to go down a little bit. I have a lot of good examples of these that are built, But I'm just gonna go back and measure and kind of fine tune some of these.
Any kind of fire requirement for side yard setbacks. State fire code.
So
I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's 6 feet is state code. Maybe Steve knows that, but between a building has to be from another building.
Yeah, there's some, I can't remember what those setbacks are, but obviously there's building materials that have to be put in if it's within a certain distance as far as, the ratings, the fire ratings of the walls, but I can't remember the minimum separation. Sorry, they keep changing on us.
We'll take a look at that.
Townhomes between the two buildings, I think you need more than 0 minimum side yard setback. You can't have five group and hook them together.
So that needs to be clarified. There's obviously the attached unit, which is 0.
5 of them, right.
And then there's when you have the break between the buildings. And I think on the medium single family, I'm gonna bump that up to 4,500. But again, all these for the most part are minimums other than the building height. And the building height is essentially 2 stories plus a roof.
All those pictures show 3 stories.
Right, and that's a question is right. And pictures don't have to match the code as well. But what is the planning commission's take on 3 stories versus 2? I mean,
Question?
yeah. You say 3, okay?
27 of our code said because of fire restrictions, not because we like or don't like.
Well, you can go higher because you are higher on Commercial Street. I mean, you have the ladders and.
No, part of the restriction, I think what he's probably referring to, I think we're about out of 3-story buildings without the fire department getting a ladder truck.
Okay,
So
Okay.
we're about out of that. So
I'm gonna ask the fire chief.
What's the current height that they?
Uh,
go to? So that's the reason for that number.
For what it's worth, which isn't much. I feel like if we go higher than 2 stories, we lose the residential feel that we're trying to achieve here. So I'd vote stay with 2.
Well, and in a 10-acre thing, maybe there's some room for a mix of some 2-story and maybe some 3-story.
It's a little bit harder in a zone to say only so many buildings can be 3 and others have to be 2. I think maybe that could be done.
Well,
It's challenging once you start phasing and other things.
unless you have a developer wanting to come in and do 10 acres and you can say, we want this mix, we want percentages of whatever, and maybe it doesn't work, but
Maybe it's the same criteria as the building variety.
yeah.
Like you can't have another 3-story building within 400 feet or 200 feet or.
Or you can only have a certain number of stuff we'll have to look into where you don't end up with the whole development is 3-story. Just as part of that mix, but.
Steve, what are your thoughts on some kind of requirement with requiring variety of building heights, meaning that we get some that are 2-story and other that are 3? I mean, we're requiring that with building styles and building types and other things as well. Your thoughts on requiring building height mixture?
Yeah, you could do that. You're gonna I mean, it'll create a little bit of complexity in the density formula. But I guess it's also something that you could, I mean, you could come up with some type of an incentive to do that. I have to think about that one, and maybe it's that you do limit the 3 stories to a percentage of the overall development. But if it were tied to some type of a density thing, that may be helpful.
And I realize, you know, 3-story, to Aaron's point, could be challenging if the whole thing looks like that, but I also like the concept just from the perspective that it gives you more options as a developer, especially on these smaller sizes. You know, you can fit more home into a smaller size if you're vertical. And that may give the developer more options and add to the variety of the neighborhood instead of detracting from it.
And in this case, you know, these single family homes on postage stamps wouldn't work at 2-story very well.
But they look like apartment buildings. So
Okay.
I think a variety is valid, and I think giving options to the developer is a good idea. I just think they look like apartment buildings.
Oh,
Well, just.
so the restriction would actually be that if someone came in wanting to build a skyscraper home, the fire code is where it would cap that.
Aren't the apartments by the bowling alley, aren't those 3-story? So how did that happen then?
Because there's this certain, Dave's talked about this, there's a certain number of buildings or percentage, something that you're allowed to have without a ladder truck.
Within a service district?
Yeah, and I don't know what that changes. May have to have fire sprinklers.
So those would be possible things to look at too, but yeah, it feels like it's doable.
Okay. One thing I did actually scroll through was street trees. This does require street trees, so trees planted in a park strip. And then also landscaping the park strip, no grass allowed in the park strip. And only 30% of the front lawns can be grass. Nothing on backyards. And so it does kind of push the water conservation to another level. Before we wrap up, any specific topic or idea that in your mind you think we should be added if you were gonna, you know, do one of these kind of communities? Is there something you would like to see included so that ends up in that built form when it's done? Yes, you're correct. So the planning commission would recommend it and then it go to the city council for approval.
And just to make sure I understand it, the incentive most likely would be density, right? That we would allow them to put more people in a small space as long as they made it look pretty and provided some of these amenities. And that's the exchange that we're trying to kind of incentivize.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You really don't know what exactly that's going to look like, because all you're doing is what I like about this is, I think it's important that you get a look at exactly what it's going to look like, almost from the get-go, rather than just some sort of ambiguous, vague idea of what they have in mind. That's just my 2 cents. I think that's helpful.
So you can have an idea what your finished product is gonna look like.
Thank you.
Another question, you kind of talk about the same person building all the homes in that parcel. Does this eliminate him from allowing someone to go in and select a different builder and build their own home?
They would just be tied to the zoning and tied to the development agreement.
And tied to the exterior and tied to
Yeah.
those pieces.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
so multiple builders could build within a project.
But if they pre-show you all the exteriors, then they're tied to that too.
So the exteriors, that comes at the building permit level. This would approve the layout, so you would see where townhomes go, twin homes, single family, the roads, the park, all of that. But the building elevation would come at the building permit level. Yes, the overlay would still be required. And what will be different is staff, like right now for buildings, it's mostly just the building inspector reviewing them for safety, health, safety, welfare issues. This would require staff to review elevation drawings to meet the ordinance. So it does add that one level at the building permit level.
I got just one more quick question. Just as I was scanning around looking at properties, this would probably fit on. The 25% on open space being used as storm drain, is that like a standard thing other places are using?
It's from experience. It's a balance between not wanting your whole usable open space, just to be a stormwater area, but also providing a little bit of flexibility.
And why I ask is I scan around looking at a lot of these areas. Morgan City's so flat, there is no access to storm drain. So that's going to change from retention to detention, a lot of these. I think there's ways to deal with nuisance water and that type of thing to keep your open area between your homes dry to where it doesn't get the trickle from the runoff, but to where your 100-year storm that they're going to have to calculate for can be used for that. That's why I was just curious where that 25, because we are kind of a unique thing where you really can't get the water anywhere in a lot of our.
Do you think that should be
areas.
more?
I think I did the numbers. I think it comes out to, it was 15% is open space and 25% of that can't be. So you're down around half an acre for 10 acres is all that could be considered. And so I don't know, that's something the engineers would have to run. I just, every development, that's something we run into is dealing with pond size. And I know if you can't get the storm water out, that'll bump your needed capacity up. So, but I think there's ways to deal with it to where you probably could use more and people would never even know unless you get that massive rainstorm. So
If the streets are those ones with the 9-foot park strips.
and that all that stuff can't figure.
Yeah, you have the bioswales there. There's.
So that's more a question for the engineers. I just was curious where the 25%.
It's
came
from
from.
kind of from experience
Yeah.
and a balance of not wanting
Yeah.
all the usable open space to be stormwater. And then, the kids are out sogging through the 6 inches of water or muddy grass to get to the playground, but then also providing a little bit of flexibility for the development.
On the rear lot loading for the cars, do the property line, where's the property line? Where's my property line and the neighbors cross to the alleyway end? The middle of the alleyway? Do I own to the middle of the alleyway or does someone else own the roadway, the alley?
Typically, the alleyway is common area,
Okay.
belonging to the HOA.
So my size of my lot's does not include the alleyway.
Correct. I have seen some that do. I don't necessarily like that. But there are developments that have that in Utah. It legally can go both ways.
We probably need to look at our road standards too, as far as alleyway width.
Yeah, and that's something Lance and I talked about for the meeting that we want to dive into.
I think we're gonna have to come up with.
Related
Yeah.
to that, did I see anything in there with the parking
No, we need to add the
That'd
parking.
be important because clearly you're gonna have events where people are gonna park on that nice street with, but then you don't want people permanently parking on that street or it obstructs the whole view. So how do you accommodate parking in these situations? So,
I'm thinking it's probably three stalls per unit, or at least minimum of 2 with 1 visitor per every other.
So it just needs to be written in. We don't need.
Yeah, oh, it'll be added.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move to adjourn?
Thank you. A lot of good feedback for the first draft.
I was gonna say thank you as well for preparing it. It's a lot of effort to put that in writing, so.
I've done the zone once before but it was in a different situation and a lot of different things. And so it's very from scratch, mostly from scratch.
Great. Shall we adjourn? All right, meeting adjourned.